So I want to make sure that we don't gloss over the feminism part of this, because that's obviously where you spend a lot of your time. I've had many guests on this show, and myself included, that have been pretty critical of third wave feminism. How is that sort of tied into everything we're talking about now?
Well, feminism has never been popular. I know now in retrospect, we think, oh no, second wave feminism was embraced. It wasn't. Oh, first wave feminism, the right to vote was embraced. It wasn't. The suffragettes back in the day were labeled terrorists, and in some ways they were. I mean, they committed bombings in public buildings over in England. It has never been popular, in part because of the Marxist elements in it, in part just because there has always been this thing, and it happens in a lot of civil rights movements, but they work and they work and they work and they work, and real lasting change takes a lot of time. It's not sexy, and it doesn't feel good. And so at some point in every movement, you get this more militant wing who gets tired of waiting, and they blow something up, either literally or figuratively. In the first wave, it was the bombings of a monument. In the second wave, it was what I call the dwark side, and that the feminist sex wars continue to this day. People have this misconception that feminism is a monolith. It's not. It's always had its layers and its factions, and there's a lot of disagreement within it. But what sort of happened is the sex negative, very reactive, angry, and I don't like doing tone argument things for obvious reasons, but what I call the dwark side, Andrea Dworkin and company, they lost both the legal battle and the hearts and minds battle in the mainstream over pornography. And so they backed off for a decade or two, somewhat, licked their wounds a little, and then hit these subcultures or these pop culture areas where we hadn't had this fight yet. And that's what we're dealing with right now, of the fights that happened over porn in the 70s moving into the 80s. We're now having about video games and pop culture phenomenon movies. And the frustrating part is it's not that there isn't a point somewhere in there, and it's not that we shouldn't avoid discussing any topic. Thinking something is stupid is not a good enough reason not to have a discussion about it, right? That's an intellectual shortcut. The problem is we can't have a discussion because everything is, I got so angry I made a sign, right? It's two people, it's two groups, hopefully just two groups, usually more than that, shouting past each other, as opposed to sitting down and having a conversation. And we could get into the structural reasons for that, but that is a deep dive.
Yeah, so when you talk about it going from the 70s and the demonization of porn and how it shifted into video games, and a lot of the same arguments can be made about how they've, demonized violence, violent movies, probably, in the 70s and 80s.
We did that in the 90s.
Right,
yeah.
and then we shifted it to Mortal Kombat in the 90s. But on the female front, like when I was playing not Mortal Kombat, when I was playing Grand Theft Auto on PlayStation, and you could just, and I never really played to accomplish anything. I just was driving into things and blowing things up and whatever, and I never got very far in the game, but I had fun. When you could grab someone out of the car and punch them or whatever, I could see a woman watching that and say, wait a minute, you're grabbing a woman out of the car, punching her in the face and stealing her car, that's anti-woman. I can understand why they would say that, but to me that would be very misguided, because I never did it like I was hunting down a woman. I treated a woman the exact way I would treat a man in the video game world, which is I grab them out of their car and I punch them. So I think you're with me on that, in terms of that you would want women to be treated the same way in a game, right?
My big wish for the Grand Theft Auto series that Rockstar just starts giving the prostitutes weapons, because that solves all the problems. I mean, the problem right now is I think it's too easy to kill these women that you've just obtained the services are for your own benefit. In Grand Theft Auto, a police officer will have a gun they can shoot back. The prostitutes, for whatever reason, in this very dangerous city, don't have tasers, don't have guns, don't have pepper spray. That's the real issue with it. Not it's making them artificially helpless in a world where it doesn't make sense. Not so much you can punch a woman in the face, because I don't have issues with that, because if you look at the real world, women are fighting to get frontline combat in the armed services, full status in the police, mixed martial arts, UFC, women punch and kick each other in the face for a living there. We're getting into this benevolent sexism territory that is still very little understood. And this idea that, we think it's great that we should hold us all to a higher conduct standard when it comes to women. But it's really not, because you can't see someone as a victim and a leader at the same time. And all these arguments, all these debates, this wringing of hands and clutching of pearls against why aren't there more women leaders? Well, that's why. Because if we continue to think that women need protection from ideas and words in a world that is very technologically driven, and gadgets solve a lot of the physical imbalances that made this an issue in the past and made chivalry a thing, right? We cannot be treated in the same standard as a male CEO or a male political leader, or even a male villain, if we're seen as this thing inherently needed protection. It can't work. It's shearing. It's crossing the streams.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a Ghostbusters reference.
That's a Ghostbusters. And unfortunately, it's a bad metaphor, unfortunately, because crossing the streams was actually good at the end. But, we ended up having to fight a giant marshmallow monster. And that's a really unfortunate joke if you think about it some ways in this context. So let's not go there.
Yeah, I see what you did there, though.
Yeah.
As you're saying this, it reminds me, so I'm curious, did you see Mad Max Fury Road?
Uh-huh.
So I absolutely loved it. I thought it was probably the best action movie in like 30 years. And when I walked out of there, I thought it was just great. And then I heard somebody say in the theater as we walked out about how, Charlize Theron is really the hero of the story and all that.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even thought about it that way. I thought she was a good guy and Mad Max was a good guy and they did their thing. But I would suspect that she probably, although the way you're nodding your head, maybe you're not going to agree with me, that she really is sort of the perfect, in that character as a woman is probably the perfect female character for a movie, right? Because she was badass. She used Mad Max to hold the gun at that great moment, instead of him using her to shoot, she used him, that she was a boss and in charge of saving all these people, that she really was sort of the perfect female character in that it was full and unapologetic and all that.
Yeah, I mean, Furiosa was the movie was fun, right? It was a 2-hour car chase. And I think people have made altogether too much of this film. There were elements about it that you could say were exceptionally feminist. There were other elements of it where it's like, just because girls are punching patriarchy or running it over with the cars doesn't make it a feminist film. There's still a lot of beauty standard tied into some really difficult stuff. And I don't use the word problematic. I can't stand it. So, the idea that they're all out in the desert in this society where resources are scarce and they're all fairly pale-skinned white people, give me a break. That race would have adapted to that environment more. So we're still dealing with the beauty myth a lot, the Western beauty myth. But that's overthinking it. It's a 2-hour car chase. If we start adding that, then we have to wonder what the deal is with that guy playing the guitar in long underwear. You
right.
Can't.
What was he like fantasy. At home? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. For those about to rock, put on the long johns. Yeah. I just wanted to see the back of him to see if he had that butt flap. And that's the thing. There's an element of displacement in fantasy that you can't ignore when you do this sort of analysis. At some point, it's just fun. There was a pre-existing tradition with the aesthetic of Mad Max that they didn't want to dismantle too much. And I was fine with that. Your comment on the perfect female character, this gets into the question of, is there any such thing of a perfect female character? Because if you say that Charlize Theron as the grease-covered, one-armed, badass is the perfect female character, then somebody like, say, the main character of the movie Enchanted, who's sort of this princess with attitude who makes dresses out of curtains and, you know, she's got her own kind of cute agency. You're saying she's imperfect. Mm-hmm. And then you get into this idea of there being one right kind of woman at any given time. And that's when I start going, and I think that's what you got out of my reaction, because I'm like, we're going to get into this perfect archetype. We're going to get into this platonic ideal of womanhood. And no matter what the ideal is at any given time, as long as there is a single ideal, then we've got problems, because everybody who doesn't conform to that ideal is obviously not ideal. And the problem with superhero films and things like that is you've got Tony Stark, and you've got Captain America, and you've got Falcon, and you've got Thor, and you've got Bruce Banner, who is very different from the Hulk, and you've got all these different types of dudes to choose from. You've got Scarlett Johansson. And I came out pretty well in terms of perfect woman in the Avengers because of the physical resemblance. But what about people who don't look that way? There's nothing to represent them in those films. And that's when we get into these issues of inclusion, and it's a very deep well. And so I will agree with you that Furiosa's a great character. I personally like the old ladies.
They were great. They were great.
They were. We need more of that. And we need to bring back the crone as a legitimate archetype. We need more badass Golden Girls. Yeah. Because
now you're speaking my language. Yeah.
Oh, really? I love the Golden Girls.
Yeah.
But there's a classic example of a bunch of women talking to each other about stuff that was important to women of that age. And they didn't think that the Golden Girls was going to appeal to that young audience, but people loved them because they had universal problems, right? And the crone, because you've got those three sort of fairy tale archetypes, the maiden, the matriarch, and the crone, and the way they interplay in fairy tales is very interesting. But over the years, as we've become more and more and more youth obsessed, we've gotten the maiden, we've gotten the matriarch, and sort of the Alice in Wonderland thing. We've lost the crone. And, epic fantasy and video games keeps them there. Thank goodness. Games like, the Witcher series and Dragon Age keep very powerful crone characters involved. But it's an important part of the life cycle that we've lost. And if you want to look at Mad Max from a feminist perspective, like, it's cool that they had different types of badass women instead of it all having to be embodied in one. And yes, Furiosa was the leader, and it was this whole thing of she was sort of left in charge, and then he walks away. And I didn't catch that at first, because I'm like, well, that's what Mad Max always does.
Right.
He
Right.
doesn't stick around.
Right, he's out for himself, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at it like, this is a Mad Max movie. These things have to happen. But when you actually think about it, I mean, if you look at a movie like with the Thunderdome, Tina Turner was the big wow there.
Love it.
And so this idea of Mad Max not really being the center of attention is not new. I think it's just been so long, and I think that when those films came out, there were a lot more women in those aggressive, very forward, very rock and roll, like Gwar in the desert kind of thing, that we didn't stop and think about it so much. Now, because we're living in the princess generation with the pink section in the toy store and the Hunger Games where wear designer clothes and then fight, all of a sudden it's an awakening all over again. We're sort of getting our groove back in that regard. And this is why history is so important. And unfortunately, in our educational paradigm, we don't have the benefit of historical context. We think this is all new, but to go Battlestar Galactica, this has all happened before. This will all happen again.
Oh man, you're busting out all my favorite references here. Thunderdome, Battlestar, Golden Girls, holy cow. All right, so let's shift slightly here, although this is all kind of ancillarily related. Let's talk about cyberbullying for a little bit, because it's packaged in online life and some of the feminist stuff you're talking about. How real do you think it is? Because I've become on the side that it just, for the most part, and I know sometimes it translates into real world stuff, but for the most part, it just doesn't matter.
Well, what we discuss as cyberbullying is not, in fact, cyberbullying. We see this one tweet that people find offensive, and then we see it as cyberbullying, right? That's not what it is. It's a pattern of behavior. And there was a group on the internet, some chat logs got leaked, that was trying to make me kill myself, like actively trying to make me take my own life. That is cyberbullying. They were unsuccessful and it was dumb, but the intent was to make something bad happen. So the problem is when you get into real on the internet, real is how much of yourself you put into that online environment.
Right. So I think maybe that's where I should have led with the question instead of dismissing it so easily, because I wanted to get to that. But I guess I was really talking about the online part versus the real part. So I'm glad you're making the distinction there.
So what happens with true cyberbullying is you get pulled into this world. People become marginalized from reality, and it's most significant with teenagers because teenagers are still forming their personal boundaries, right? The reason things are 18 plus, and if you want to go true human development, you have to push it up to 22, 23 years old. People are not fully formed human beings yet. And they're getting into these online environments where it's very tough to tell what's real. That's the brilliance of Mr. Robot, is it immerses you in that subjective reality of the internet in a television show. But these young people and some older people who, because of abuse or because of various things, don't have strong personal boundaries, they have their own sense of self removed. It is artificially removed from them, and they start doing things and saying things they know are wrong out of fear. And power dynamics are very interesting on the internet because something as simple as anonymity can make a person who is powerless be much more powerful when you don't know where something's coming from, right? When someone is posting a picture of your house, the front of your house, online, and you don't know where it's coming from, that can be very, very scary.
Right. So that's where I would make the distinction, and that's the real world distinction that you're talking about. I'm not diminishing, of course, doxing people and actual real world violence that could come of this, letting people know other locations or any of that kind of stuff, or financial information, that kind of stuff. I'm just talking about, so those are the two pieces of this. There's that.
Yeah, but I mean, that is not the real world. Somebody taking a Google Earth picture of your house and putting it online, that's not the real world. That's real-ish. You get into this truthiness. That is the world filtered through the internet. Someone is not standing outside your house taking a picture. Someone found your address through something. And so they connected the dots. They went, I'm going to grab this from this broadcast where somebody happened to leave the geotag on. I'm going to look this up. I'm going to grab the Google Earth image and make it seem like I'm standing right outside your house. The emotional response is real.
Is real, yeah.
But it's not real. And are we talking about the emotions real, or are we talking about the threat being real?
Yeah.
That is a very, very difficult thing that unfortunately our various laws in various jurisdictions are really lagging behind.
Yeah. So how have you dealt with this? I mean, as someone that puts yourself out there, you're totally, you're not afraid to share your opinions and all that. Everything that you're saying here, I know is going to obviously bring a certain amount of hate. I'll get a certain amount of hate just for talking to you about it. How do you navigate that in your own life?
Well, first of all, there's very little of me to dox, including there's so many pictures of my ass on the internet, it's not even funny. So there's very little that can embarrass me. But that was part of where my strategies that I worked with a national youth organization up here in Canada to adopt best practices for insulating and dealing with cyberbullying. And what you have to do is recognize that it's a negative ad campaign. It's more like the nonsense that goes on in politics than real life stalking or real life bullying. And obviously, negative ad campaign sounds a lot less scary than cyberbullying.
Right.
But precisely, the first step is to take the fear out of it and help the person get a sense of control back. Because once you get that sense of control back, once you reassert those personal boundaries, then it becomes noise. right? And that's the difference between somebody who is resilient to it and someone who is not. And that is what we do. I use the 6 powers of persuasion, the 6 weapons of influence sort of thing, and I break it down for youth, showing that this is a negative ad campaign. That's all it is. If you are at physical risk from anybody but yourself, this goes to another level now. This is not something that community can solve. Then it's a legal issue. Then it's an issue for the police. However, most of it sits in this gray area, below what is appropriate and acceptable and above what is illegal. And that's the stuff that we have to work on together. And the thing people don't do, they don't tend to do, is talk to the people around them and before it starts and say, what do we do if this happens? And this is something I would really suggest that families do, that parents do, that significant others do, anybody who spends any kind of time in internet communities. Get a plan in advance, because consistency is a power of persuasion. What cyberbullying attempts to do is force you to try to be consistent in inconsistent ways. So it usually takes your biggest strength, whether that be honesty or openness or transparency, and turn it into a negative. Call you a liar, say you're hiding something, whatever. And so you do more and more and more. You put more and more and more effort into trying to keep yourself consistent. And that's what wears you out. That's what exhausts you and leads you to despair and all that stuff. You end up fighting it. Well, if you've got a plan with your social group, with your support staff, for lack of a better term, in advance, then instead of it going, what do I do? What do I do? Then it's, okay, protocols kick in. This is what we do. This is what we've agreed to do. And so I suggest that people write down the steps and sign it. Because again, it's an opt-in in advance. And that's what a lot of people don't do. And that's why the first time it happens is often the worst.
Yeah, it's so interesting because what you're talking about can be related to so many. It's not just people in the gaming community or in any of the things that we've talked about here. I see this so much with the tactics that I'm always talking about that the regressive left uses about lying and smearing and slandering people and making people defend things over and over, and fake memes and misquoted things and all of this stuff. And it's like, if those of us that were to be brave enough to put unpopular positions out there really had a plan to deal with the backlash, that would save us from a lot of mental energy that we have to spend cleaning up messes that aren't of our own doing.
Yeah, because it takes a lot less energy to execute than to build, right? And you can do it from a place of calm and a place of an even keel before it happens. I mean, the regressive left thinks I'm literally the devil. Their words, not mine. And there's a reason for that. It's because I have developed these things that actually do work. And so, I went through that period where the regressives in my field did almost make me quit. And I wrote about it extensively and hit the point where it's like, okay, either I'm going to quit or I'm going to get serious about this and actually develop a plan, make something good come out of this that other people can replicate. Because if I've done the work, why shouldn't society benefit? And isn't that what progressive values are? Like that right there. Let's prevent the same mistakes. Let's make progress.
Are you saying progressives aren't really for progress? Is that what you're saying?
Dave, I remember when we used to be called liberals, and then liberal became a dirty word. And so they adopted progressives as a euphemism for liberal. And now progressives have become a dirty word. And it's precisely this sort of Orwellian, double think word play that has always been sort of, the phrase that must not be named is cultural Marxism. It's funny because it's almost the serpent eating its own tail at this point. They call it political correctness. It's just a way of making people burn a lot of energy on things that don't matter, so we don't address the things that really do.
Yeah. Well, listen, Liana, there's so much more that I wanted to do here, but this is what we're going to do. Next time, we'll have you on again. We're going to do it in person, but you are going to get me all cosplayed up. Does that sound doable?
That is, yay! I'm so excited.
Yeah, and it's going to be Jedi. It's going to be Star Wars related, but like, You know, could be off
Now-
a little bit. You know what I mean?
So we're gonna do like original character. We're gonna do like your first name's Rubin, and then we need like a 1-syllable last name for your like original Jedi character.
Oh, right. All right. Well, you know what? We'll deal with that.
Are you gonna be human, or are you gonna be one of the like alien races?
I think alien, but I don't want to give this all away to everybody right now. We got to leave them.
I'm so excited.
We got to leave them wanting more. All right. Well, really, Liana, it was a pleasure talking to you. And you guys can follow Liana. It is at Red Liana K on the Twitter, or check out her site at lianakerzner.com.